So my great philosophical hero is Aristotle, and my favorite work by Aristotle is the Nicomachean Ethics. I say this all the time on the channel, and I'm going to say it again. But I want to talk to you about the first line in the Nicomachean Ethics, or first couple of lines. It's the way that Aristotle begins this momentous work. And Aristotle writes that every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action as well as choice, is held to aim at some good. Hence, people have nobly declared that the good is that at which all things aim. That's just two sentences, but Aristotle is packing in so much meaning into those two lines. Aristotle is saying that actions and activities should be assessed not by the things that they do, right, but actually rather what they aim at. So Aristotle is engaging in what we in philosophy call a teleological way of thinking, where we are assessing the ends or the point or the goal of an action, and that's how we explain it and how we assess it, rather than thinking about maybe the causes. This is a very ancient way of thinking. It's characteristically Aristotelian, but many in the ancient world, and pretty much until about the time of Isaac Newton, would engage in teleological thinking all the time. I would say humans still engage in teleological thinking, but a lot of it's sort of been beaten out of us by modernity. Aristotle is also saying that we don't just aim at anything, willy-nilly. Instead, we are aiming at some good. And in fact, ultimately, Aristotle will say that all actions aim finally at the good. So there is a singular good, and we can assess actions based on how well they will actually achieve what they aim for, which is the good. All of this seems very abstract and philosophical, though I think if you're someone who watches this channel, you're not bothered by something seeming abstract and philosophical. But I want to say that it's not really abstract. It's definitely deeply philosophical, but it's not abstract. Aristotle is actually talking about life. Aristotle is talking about the meaning of life. And I think that even by thinking just a little bit about a couple of sentences at the beginning of the Nicomachean Ethics, you can start to think about your own life. Now, of course, you should all go and read the whole book. Just thinking about 2 or 3 lines isn't going to be enough, but this can really kickstart you. And I want to offer a couple of thoughts that came to me as I was struggling with some stuff, to be honest, and then as I was using Aristotle to sort of think through those problems. You see, I've needed to make a video for a couple of days. I've needed to record one to keep on schedule because I have a schedule, because I now have an income and have a community around this whole YouTube channel, and I want to maintain that, so that means I need to produce content. And I was sitting down in front of my camera with my microphone. I had my list of video ideas. I had some rough scripts written out, and I kept recording. And then what would happen is a few minutes into every video, I just was unable to finish it because I just didn't feel good about it. I've hit this kind of feeling before, not just with YouTube, but with lots of things. It happened to me in graduate school once or twice. Sometimes happens to me with reading, where I just can't finish any books, even though I really, really want to. And I don't think this is unique to me. Lots of people engage in this. Creators sometimes call this burnout. Writers call this writer's block. Other people just think it's them becoming a little bit depressed. Now, it's not as if we can always reason our way out of these artistic slumps or something like this. But occasionally, thinking philosophically can at least improve the situation, at least a little bit. And I think today this really helped. You see, I was trying to create content, and I had a sort of mechanistic explanation for why I needed to create content. And you might even say that I had a goal in mind, so maybe even I had a teleological explanation. I needed to achieve certain things, namely the production of content. But what I was forgetting was that actually the production of content itself needs to be assessed teleologically, and I needed to ask what it was aiming for. And by sitting down in front of the camera with scripts I didn't really feel that great about, talking about books maybe that I didn't really love, or topics that I didn't feel super prepared to talk about, what I had realized was I was no longer attempting to create good, quality, engaging, virtuous content. I was simply trying to create content. I was simply just trying to create something so that I could produce it, so that the algorithm wouldn't disfavor me in the future, and so that you would keep watching maybe eventually. But how un-Aristotelian of me. Aristotle is, a philosopher who I think has a lot to say to the modern day. All of us who are concerned about habits or self-improvement, I think Aristotle has more to say basically than any modern writer on the subject. And I'm someone who's read a fair amount of Aristotle. At least I've read the Nicomachean Ethics quite a few times in my life. And yet I was still slipping out of this wave, and yet was falling into a trap that I would say is the trap of our age. I was engaging in productivity for productivity's sake. I just wanted to produce, and I was feeling bad that I was unable to produce. I was feeling a bit like a failure. Now, of course, there's a great irony in what I'm doing right now. I am now making content about how I couldn't make content, and you might think that this is a bit cynical because, hey, I might have struggled a bit, and at least now I'm still getting a video out on time, right? But I do think that there's a nice point here. I think that there's something worth saying and worth mentioning to all of you. When you are struggling with a task, when you are really banging your head against a wall, you should ask yourself, what's the point? Not in desperation, not as if the answer will be totally negative and should lead you to despair and to give up, but rather to remember the goal, right? And for us, it's going to be striving towards the good. And to put it in even more Aristotelian terms, it's about becoming more virtuous and thus becoming better human beings. Asking what's the point, it turns out, is a good thing to ask about your reading if you're struggling with your reading, about your creative work if you're struggling with your creative work, about your job, about your family. Just asking what's the point. Just by asking that question, you can remind yourself of the reason that you wanted to do those things in the first place. And my hope is by asking yourself that question, you are able to see why it's worth continuing to do those things as well. This is a very different kind of video for this channel. It's not about books, really. It's only a little bit about philosophy, but I hope you like it. Because in this world where we assess everything by the metrics of productivity, where we assess our reading not by the quality of what we've read or its impact on our lives, but rather by the number of books that we've been able to read or the page counts, I think sometimes we all need to be reminded about this. And sometimes we just need to ask ourselves, what's the point?